the next panel is focused on supporting survivors of sexual abuse in sport, but much more than that, it is also about discussing solutions for the future and preventing abuse from happening for generations to come. And so I am very honored to be here with you today. Actually, let me just, sorry, I'm trying to get this mic here. I'm very honored to be here with you today. And this is a tough conversation, we know that. And so before we get started, I just want to make sure that you are aware of a couple of things in your packet. The first is, there is a little flyer that says audience information. And one of the things that we're trying to do here is to make this a safe space to have this conversation, this very difficult but needed conversation. So if for any reason you feel uncomfortable or there's something about what we're talking about that triggers you or makes you feel like you don't want to be in the room at the moment, that is totally fine. Please feel free to just get up and walk out, but be respectful of the other panelists, especially if you decide to come back into the room. We also have the fantastic organizers who have made sure there is some support for folks if they want to talk afterwards about this session. And you'll see at the very bottom of your form, there's a confidential number that you can text and say, I'd just like to talk to a professional, go a little deeper into this conversation. I need some support right now. So I will actually kudos to the organizers for doing that. That's something that people don't often do, and I think very welcome. Yes. The second thing I want to point to is that there's a little piece of paper that says Q&A, and about halfway into the program, I'm going to stop and collect these, because one of the things we want to do is we want to hear from our amazing panelists, but we also want to have an opportunity to interact with you, the audience. And so if you have a message of support or a particular question you'd like to pose, write it down throughout the next half hour, and then at some point we'll just stop and collect those. And of course, we won't get to all of them, but I understand that there's some panels that are being set up where these questions will be put. And I think especially the messages of support are always welcome. And so if there's something you want to say, the idea is that the conversation will continue throughout the next 2 days. All right. I think I did what I was supposed to do. Check, check, check. All right. So I've been asked to give a little bit of background and context before we start the conversation with our panelists. And again, this is not an easy conversation, but it is one that we have an ethical and moral responsibility to have. And I'm going to say a few things about kind of the state of child sexual abuse and violence against children worldwide. But if you remember nothing else from what I say, remember these three things. The first is, it's bad. There is a lot of child sexual abuse happening in the world, in every single country, and it affects every social class, every race, every ethnicity. It is a global problem. The second thing is, it does not have to be this way. It is preventable. There are solutions that we know work and can make a difference. And the final one is, everyone has a role to play. That means every one of you has a role to play. And we're going to get into that a little bit more moving forward. So let me start with the it's bad part. So I work for an organization called Together for Girls, and we are a public-private partnership that includes several UN agencies, as well as governments, private sector, and we are focused on ending violence against children, but with special attention to sexual violence and abuse. And one of the things we've done is there is so much silence and myth and lack of information around this issue and what's really going on. We always start with data and evidence, and we've developed with UNICEF and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control these national surveys that at a country level look at what's happening when it comes to child abuse and sexual violence against children, and are now in 22 countries around the world. And the point of the data is then to spur action and to, encourage governments, private sector, and a variety of actors to respond. But from our data, we find the following. And again, it changes a little from country to country, but it's really shocking. We find that about 1 in 4 girls experience some kind of sexual violence or abuse before the age of 18. And the more we started looking into the data on girls, we also started realizing that this is a huge issue for boys. It's happening at, the rates are a little bit lower, but still we're finding that about 1 in 9 boys are experiencing some kind of sexual violence or abuse before the age of 18. So this is what I like to call the single largest silent epidemic of our time. The other thing we found through data, and again, starting always with the evidence, is that the vast majority of perpetrators are known to the child. So the perpetrators are someone the child knows, a friend, a neighbor, a family member, a teacher, a priest, or a coach. And that's a phenomenon that repeats all over the world. We've also found that most people never disclose, they never tell anyone, and that's why I call it the silent epidemic. We find that about only half of girls ever tell anyone about their experiences. And for boys, those numbers are even lower. It's about a third. The 2 top reasons for not telling someone are fear and shame. Think about that and what it is that we're communicating to our children if those are the 2 top reasons for not saying anything. But again, sport is a particularly vulnerable place for kids. And Nancy, you just did such a fantastic job at the beginning, really explaining why that is. I'm not going to go into it, but it really has to do with these power differentials, with the kind of environment that is then created with very little safety net, regulation, recourse, and it's just a breeding grounds for this kind of abuse. And we've heard about the various kind of widespread abuses that have emerged in recent years, like Larry Nassar in the US, Barry Bonnell in the UK. And this is still happening today. This isn't like something that's way in the past. A recent study in the UK of grassroots sports found that on average there is 1 allegation of child abuse a day, and most of those are sexual in nature. So this is not a thing of the past. It is happening today. And I want to get to my second point, which is it doesn't have to be this way. We know there are decades of research that show that there are policies and programs and interventions that can help prevent the sexual abuse of children. And this is true for sport as well, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that because everyone has a role to play. This isn't a problem that one organization or one single actor or sector is going to solve alone. We all have a role to play, and that means you all have a role to play. And we'll get more into that in a moment. And before I get to our amazing panelists, I do want to say something about the importance on the voice of survivors. Survivors having the courage to come forward and talk about their experiences is part of the solution. And this is true for sport, and it's true for all other areas, because it raises awareness around what's really happening, the consequences, and just the magnitude of this problem. And I know very well from a personal place what it's like to come forward. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse, and 10 years ago I decided to come forward with my story. So I know from a personal place how hard it is to go public about what's happened to you. But I decided to share my story like most survivors because the silence around this issue was deafening. The Nobel Peace Laureate Malala once said, "When the entire world is silent, one voice can become powerful." And today we're going to hear 3 very powerful voices from these 3 amazing, courageous human beings that are with us here today. 3 athletes who have come forward as survivors of child sexual abuse and are now working to make the world of sport a better and safer place for all children. So it is my immense pleasure to introduce Karen Leach, Colin Harris, and Jessica Howard. And let's give them a hand of applause. All right, so let's do some chatting. Karen, we'll start with you. I'm going to skip you, Colin. I'll be back to you in a second. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, so we get to know you a little.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Karen, and I come from Ireland. When I was a little girl, I had a dream, and my dream was to swim for Ireland at the Olympics. I believed I could do it, and my mum and dad believed in me and my dream, and they did everything possible to support me to have my dream come true. My swimming coach, who was the Irish Olympic coach at the time, saw me swim, and then he headhunted me to join his swimming club because he said it was the best swimming club in Ireland, and he was the best coach in Ireland, and he would make my dream come true. Instead of making my dream come true, he destroyed me, he destroyed my life, my family's life, and he broke my spirit, and he left me as a dead little girl walking around this world. He blackmailed me for my dream, and he abused me sexually, mentally, physically and emotionally from 10 years of age till I left swimming at 17. This impact that it had on my life and my family's life. My mum told me that she was sorry that what had happened to me, but she told me she was sorry that what happened to me as a little girl, that she didn't take care of me, that she didn't mind me. And 4 days later, my mum was taken out of a canal, and my mum was dead. My mum was gone. This broke my family's hearts. This destroyed my dad. My dad used to say after that, "Karen, I took you there and Mum is dead." My dad died of a broken heart only a couple of years ago. My dream to swim for Ireland in a wonderful sport destroyed my life and left me for many, many years a dead young girl walking around this world. That's why I'm here today. I do not want any other child or young person to ever end up with a life like mine.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you for your courage for being here today. I want to ask you, we talk a lot about what we refer to sometimes as kind of the contact sexual abuse, but that incident once it's happening. But I know that one of the things you've talked a lot about is what happens before that whole grooming process and how you get to a place where something like that can happen. Can you tell us a little bit about that and especially what advice you have to those of us here about how to prevent something like that?
I suppose the biggest thing is that when I speak to people, they automatically focus in on sexual abuse. I just want to say that it is not just sexual abuse. My swimming coach abused me sexually, mentally, physically and emotionally. There's a whole big picture there that many people miss out on. He told me when I was a little girl that he would make my dream come true. He was the best coach in Ireland. He was the Irish Olympic coach. He had me straight away. He had my parents supported me. The process started, it's called grooming. He started by being nice to me, encouraging me, telling me do this, do that. He knew everything to make me swim faster and get me to the Olympics. So I believed everything he said. Everything he did or told me to do, I did. There's so many different ways to abuse a child. How he looked at me, how he didn't look at me, how he spoke to me, how he didn't speak to me, the volume of his voice, was it high, was it low, his body language, is he pointing his finger at me, is he not pointing his finger at me, is he looking at his stopwatch, is he not looking at his stopwatch, why is he not looking at his stopwatch, I must have swam bad, is he writing in his notebook, he's not writing in his notebook. All of this had me total fear, total control, total manipulation, all because I wanted to swim for Ireland at the Olympics. He was my swimming coach. He was the best in Ireland. He was given the power by the Swimming Association, the organisation, sporting organisations and the government in my country to be who he was. So he was the best and everyone stood by that. No one questioned him. But not only me, but many, many other young women he abused by total control, power and manipulation. And I just want to say, coaches aren't the best. They're not the best. They can't be the best coach without us, the swimmers, the football players, the gymnasts, all of us. We're the best. But you see, they take that away from us. They destroy us. They break our spirit. That we think. I spent my whole life thinking I was the worst. I started out as a really good swimmer, as a young girl with potential and dreams to go to the Olympics. I didn't do any of that. I ended up as a bad swimmer. I thought I was useless. I wouldn't even class myself as a swimmer for many, many years until I found my voice. I was silenced as a little girl, and then I was silenced through illness, depression, being broken. I have found my voice, and I won't be silenced again, and I will keep speaking, and I will bring awareness, and I will keep talking about this, because we have got to do more and protect children and young people and adults at risk. There are many adults out there broken because what happened to them as children, and they can follow on. You get abused all over again as an adult. There is such a big picture. For me, it is not just sexual abuse. It is emotional, physical, mental. And we have got to keep talking about it. We have got to break the silence. If we don't, it's uncomfortable to talk about. But if it's uncomfortable for you and nothing happened to you, imagine what it feels like for somebody that is trying to tell you what's happening to them. It's impossible. I was there. I know what it's like. And you feel worse than you already feel. So we have got to break the silence and keep talking about this. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Karen. Just such powerful words, really, really powerful. Thank you. Colin, I'm going to switch over to you now and ask you to do the same. Tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are.
I'm assuming that's working. Can you hear me out there? Yeah? Bit more. Okay, a bit more forward. I'll have to lean forward and do this. How about that? Is that better? I have a quiet voice. Okay, so even more, even quiet. Okay, all right, I'll shout down this thing. Okay. So my name's Colin Harris. I'm 62 years old. I think that's relevant probably in this case. I played football. Football was my sport. From a boy, I loved football. And I was lucky enough to be good at football, and I played for Chelsea Football Club from the years between 11 and 18 years. We're talking a long time ago. We're talking about the late 1960s, early 1970s. I started playing full-time at the club around about 15 years of age, and it was from this point that the sexual abuse started by the coach, the chief coach there, a man called Eddie Heath, who I had known from the age of 11, and Karen was talking about grooming earlier. It's very clear that I was groomed by the coach, Heath, and also my family was groomed. My family thought that this man, Heath, was a great man. So it was the family grooming and me being groomed as a victim, if you like. So I was a club for around about 7 years. I disclosed the sexual abuse in November 2016 when Andy Woodward and various others disclosed in the UK. This is a Bennell case that you talked about earlier. I had not spoken about this for, I'm trying to work out the figures in my head, my maths is not good here, 45 years, around about 45 years. This is the first time I'd ever spoken about it. And as you can imagine, that's a difficult decision to make. Before making the decision to talk about this, firstly I had to talk to my family about this, and I suppose you can imagine the conversation with my wife, who'd been living with a man now for 30 years, who essentially had what we might call this dark secret. It wasn't an easy conversation with her, nor with my 3 children, who are now grown adults. So it was a difficult decision to disclose, and I suppose we came to a decision, my family and I, that I would disclose and I would go public with this, with a mission, if you like, and that mission was to use the skills that I had, the abilities that I had, to effect change. That was the mission. I wanted to do something, and I'm talking in similar terms to Karen here, that I suppose the impetus for that was really to make sure that what happened to me as a kid, as a young boy, was far less likely to happen to to people in my position in the future. So that was the impetus. I was trying to effect change, and I listened to Mary, when I listened to Mary Robertson earlier, she made a really important point in her opening address, and this is something that is actually vital. It's why I'm here, and you're listening to me, hopefully. I think it's important that sport walks the talk, not just talks the talk. That's why I'm here. And if I'm honest, I've heard lots of talk in the short time I've been involved in this, and I find too much talk quite painful nowadays. So yes, I'm impatient, I want action, but I'm also very realistic, I hope. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, Colin. Just as a follow-up for you, because I think, I mentioned at the beginning some of the data we have on how difficult it is for boys and men to come forward and talk about their experiences. Can you tell us a little bit more about how experiencing abuse as a boy is different, focusing particularly on this audience in terms of how boys can be helped and how we can prevent the abuse of boys?
Yeah, for me this is an interesting subject, and one that I'm sort of surprised that I'm talking about, but I think I could talk about this for hours. But you're fine, you've got 5 minutes. I'm very interested on this idea because it affects me, has affected me, the effect of child sexual abuse on long-term health, mental health, life chances, etc. And I suppose I'm going to be a bit male-centric, that's my experience, I'm a male. But I want to talk about what the long-term effects are of of sexual abuse and mental health, and I use myself as a sort of case study, if you like. So I'll start off by talking a bit about my story when it comes to this, and I'll come on hopefully to talk about what we can do about this. So I'm going to talk about what happened to me. When I disclosed that 2 years or so ago, I've explained the difficulty of having the conversation with my wife and my family. When I disclosed to my wife, one of the first things she said was, "Well, that explains a lot, doesn't it?" That was her reaction. Let me tell you a bit about myself as an adult. I've suffered mental health problems all my life. I can give you a catalogue of maladies. I've suffered from depression, mild depression to severe depression, which has been dysfunctional. I had problems with self-esteem. I've got a list here, folks. So I don't know how long we've got. But feelings of guilt, feelings if I'm wrong, difficulties with relationships is a big one, and difficulties with trust. There's no doubt about that. And interestingly, though, I initially resisted my wife's diagnosis. If we haven't got it, her diagnosis was that you've been sexually abused as a kid, has had a long-term effect on your mental health. I resisted that. I don't know whether it's because I'm arrogant or whatever. I hope not. But I thought this was about me. Constitutionally, what I was a depressed person. I've always felt that's been part of my life, and something happens when you get involved in the issue that we're here talking about today, is that you meet a lot of people that have gone through the same experiences, that have been sexually abused as children. And what I found was that we talked to each other about what happened to us, how we've been, about our lives, and what came across so strongly, and we've had these conversations, is that we could all have been talking for each other in terms of the effects, what we might perceive as the effects of being abused as a child. And I came round to the idea that, well, actually, there is really something in this. And I wouldn't say that I can't give you cause and effect here, child sexual abuse and long-term mental health issues and so on, but there's certainly a relationship between the two. And what I was finding when I look back at what happened to me, all those feelings of shame, guilt, worthlessness, etc., I'm still talking about the 62-year-old man when I say those words. Those are the mental issues that I still have. So I think it's very important that we take this seriously, and of course there needs to be more research done on this, particularly more research on men, and we've talked about it being under-researched in men, that allows us to have some more substantive evidence about this connection, because I think it's a very real connection. So I think there's a long-term thing. Can I just put a couple more things? Have I got time? You're not going to give me a card or anything horrible? Okay. All right. But I also think sport adds some particular issues into the mix here, and I'd like to talk about those because I think they're important. The thing about elite sport is that most people who enter elite sport fail. By that I mean they don't make it. There's a high failure rate. Is this 2%, 98%, or 1%, 99% rate that we talk about? A lot of people don't make it. So they have to go from being the person that was going to be the great sportsman or woman to a person that is no longer that. They're back in real life, picking up their real life, life as outside of sport. This is a particular interest to me, and I've spoken now because it is an interest to a lot of therapists but this is to do with football. I'm a footballer who treat footballers for their issues, abused footballers I'm talking about. And one of the things that comes out very strongly is the toxic mix of the transition into life outside of sport and the abuse. So in a sense, I'm finding from my limited bit of research on this, is that we need to pay a lot of attention to transition in sport. And I don't want to upset anybody because I'm by no means an expert, but I don't think we're very good at transitioning athletes into the different world outside of sport. I think we need to think about that a lot. I think it's very important that we do that. Last point, 1 minute, all right? I told you. The other issue, and I'm talking particularly about men here, I think is the issue of masculinity. I think this is so important. A lot of the reasons that men, and I'm talking in football, about football again here, a lot of the reasons that men didn't disclose in football, we learned this from the Benel experience, etc., is something to do on how they tell you. I was chatting to Steve Waters, who some of you know, a couple of days ago. The reasons for not disclosing was to do with it would say something about my masculinity. My masculinity. To admit that this stuff happened to me would make me less of a man. It would transgress masculine norms. And I think that's ever so important. We need to understand that. So one of the big things, important things that's come out of Andy Woodward and others' revelations in November 2016 is that, well, I call Andy Woodward, if you like, the black swan, if you understand my sort of metaphor here, is that he actually flagged this up as something that happened, abuse, I mean. And he gave men an opportunity to understand it was okay to talk about this in public, it's all right. But I would still say that we have, when we think about long-term effects of abuse, is we have a toxic mix in sport. We have the child sexual abuse, we have transition, and we also have issues around masculinity when it comes to men. And I think we need to think about that, particularly when we have governing bodies trying to look after welfare of elite sports people. This needs to be considered. I think is a very important point. I think I'd best stop, hadn't I?
You're good. That was fantastic. Thank you, Colin. And thank you for your courage. It's so important. Seriously, I could sit here all day listening to you, but we're gonna transition now. Want to hear from you, Jessica. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, just listening to you two, it's like picking out pieces of my own story, and I can't believe how similar our lives have been. And I just met you, and I don't know you, I don't know anything about your lives, but just what you've mentioned so far has so affected my life. And since my retirement from gymnastics, I have spent my life suffering the same textbook side effects of abuse, and it is such a tragedy, and I am so sorry to hear you've lived through that, but I am also very heartened to see that you have come out fighting, and I hope I can do the same thing. I began rhythmic gymnastics when I was 10. I like to always blame my mom a little bit. She's sitting right here. She thought I was lazy. And they had a new rhythmic gymnastics coach at my old gymnastics club, and it combined ballet and flexibility and artistry, and it was just something that I fell in love with because ballet was boring. I needed more competitive, something to really, just be at for 5 hours a day and get all my energy out or something. But it wasn't until the 1996 Olympics when my father took me to Atlanta, Georgia to watch the rhythmic gymnastics. We got tickets to the finals, and I saw a ball routine from a gymnast, happened to be from Bulgaria. That the sport changed something for me. It was elevated to the level of art. It became my sun. It became my center. It's like seeing a piece of art in a museum that just changes your perspective on the world. And I know many of you have probably felt that looking at something in your lifetime, and I just want you to feel that that is the love that I felt as a child for my sport. And it was so innocent and so instantaneous, and I had no right to believe as a 12-year-old looking at that routine that I had any chance at making the 2000 Olympic team 4 years later. I was, I had my secret superpower maybe was that I was a psychotically hard worker, and if they had bought in a real doctor, they might have just told me to cool it a little bit. Because I worked so hard that it actually caused some other, problems. But the coaches never tell you to work less. So it turned out to work well in my favor. I improved very quickly. But seeing that routine, it gave me the inspiration, it gave me the identity, it gave me the will, the drive to dedicate my entire life, mind, soul, body, whatever it took. It was that moment that got me through every horrible, abusive, sick moment that lasted the rest of my career. And they were full. From the age of 12 to the age of 20 when I retired, it was just a litany of abuse. And I don't know how you guys are standing here today. I don't know how I'm standing here today. It is just, maybe it's a miracle, maybe it's support, maybe it's, the way fate works. I don't like to think of things that way, that somehow pain makes things better somehow in the world. I don't like to think that, but I'm happy to be here so that this never happens again. But I switched coaches, and at that point, after seeing that Olympic Games, and physical and emotional abuse became a daily part of my life. She told me, or my parents, at my first class lesson, she barely paid attention to me to show me, exactly where I was on the food chain, and then she told them she could make me like Jessica Davis, who was the 1996 Olympian for the United States, and we were sold, So from then on, anything she said went. And the emotional and physical abuse was, pretty light to start with, just name calling, and if you had an injury, you worked out on it. It was, basic stuff for gymnastics, so it wasn't, very memorable. But as I steadily improved and made national teams, was doing international competitions, started winning medals, and the USA Gymnastics began to see me as the potential qualifier for the 2000 Olympic Games, the stakes just got higher and higher and higher. Her reputation was on the line. I was clearly her entire focus, and the emotional and physical abuse was out of control. And the entire system at USA Gymnastics, the officials that were supposed to keep her in check, you would assume, you know, she had to answer to somebody, they just stood by and literally stood by her while I would break something and be unable to walk and not respond. And then kick me out of the gym and then send me to my room until I was allowed to come out, because I was in trouble. Not take me to the doctor, not do anything. So by the time I was 15 years old, it was my first national championship. I was the youngest at that point to win a national championship. I went to world championships that year, but during the course of that year, I faced debilitating hip pain. The kind where you wake up and you don't think you can walk. And I would spend a couple of hours before each practice just getting warm enough to go to practice, to work out for 6 more hours to, you know, get through. And it was absolutely miserable, and it did seem like a career-ending, you know, injury. And after we finished World Championships, somewhere in the USA Gymnastics offices, I think between the women's program and the rhythmic program, they had a brilliant idea to send me to the Caroli Ranch in the middle of godforsaken nowhere, Texas, where the Carolis, the famed Carolis, you know, had their ranch. It is hours from civilization. There are llamas and cabins, and sometimes they feed you. And they have Dr. Larry Nasser. And this became the central figure, gym point for the entire national team beginning in 2000. In 1999, I was a rhythmic gymnast, and rhythmic gymnasts did not go to the ranch. So this was a huge honor for me to be invited to the ranch to work with the famous Olympic doctor, Larry Nasser. So I flew by myself, which was odd because my parents had made a decision to fly with me because they were very shocked and surprised by my first couple of international competitions, how USA Gymnastics didn't seem to care if I had a bursa sac explode and then they wanted to stick a needle in my knee behind the scenes and just draw up, you know, whatever. So they were like, yeah, you know, I think just in case our daughter needs to go to the emergency room, we're going to travel with her. But no parents were allowed at the Caroli Ranch, so I was by myself. There was no adult responsible for me. I was on vacation from my coach. I was the happiest I had been in, seriously, 2 years. I was relaxed. And as a result, I was served on a silver platter to Larry Nasser, who we now know is a vicious sexual predator who sexually abused hundreds and hundreds of gymnasts under the guise of treatment. And I was there for 1 week straight. And then I buried it, thought it was treatment, went home, didn't think about it until the news came out in August 2016, around the Olympic Games, that USA Gymnastics had been hiding sex abuse files. His name had not been mentioned yet. So that's what brought me up to August 2016.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, again, for your courage and for being with us here today. We appreciate it. Tell us a little bit more about what it was like to become the whistleblower. I mean, you made a decision to be a whistleblower, to be an advocate. Tell us about that decision to come forward.
Well, first, realizing that something, I had thought I had been doing a pretty good job, which is I now know is a cognitive distortion dealing with all the emotional and physical abuse that came from gymnastics. But the years from my retirement to the age of 32 when the story came out, I was a disaster. I mean, again, textbook side effects, very dangerous situations throughout all of those years. I was trying. I was really trying. I was doing everything within my power. My poor parents, had to live through me, just holding on and grasping on. And I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky I made it through those years. And, when the story came out and I got a phone call from a rather famous Olympic champion who remembered having a conversation with me, and Nasser's name came up, and I made a face. And just from that moment, she thought to call me. After the initial article came out about hiding the sex abuse files, and she called me and she just said, Jessica, have you ever been abused by Larry Nasser? And I had to think about it, but it came back like a flood. I mean, just something buried like that, you can't control how it comes back to you. And I think that's one of the most shocking things, because it's buried for so long. You think, oh, you're not going to feel it, or it's just going to be this minor little detail in your life, and your life is going to go on just as normal. And it just came back like a flood. It felt like I was back at the training center, back at the Caroli Ranch, back in that tiny little room, back with just him and the clock on the wall and the room and just everything about it. The payphone, there was no way to contact my parents. It all came back so vividly. And I had a very immediate choice to make. Do I call this reporter? Because in my mind, I'm thinking he's still the Olympic team doctor. And I thought maybe it was only me. But if it was only me, he needs to be out of the gym, because this is a possibility for another person. So at the time, and I still, part-time, I work with student athletes that are around the pre-professional age, which is what I was, 14, 15 years old. And I remember going to a class on the Upper East Side in Manhattan and looking at these girls, and I couldn't even imagine saying a word to make them cry or make a face. And just after realizing what somebody had done to violate me in that way, when I was so innocent, I didn't even know what it was. My entire goal, my entire life was competing for the United States and making the Olympic team and turning into art. I had no, guys didn't exist for me, right? So I didn't even understand, and just the idea watching these kids stretch as I gave them their exercises, I could not stop crying and thinking of somebody hurting them. And even though it was one of the most difficult decisions of my life, because I was terrified of USA Gymnastics, I had dedicated my life to proving myself to USA Gymnastics as a gymnast, because they do not respect rhythmic gymnastics in our country. And they pretend they do. When the time comes, and then behind closed doors, not even behind closed doors, at board meetings to my face, they have plenty of times disparaged my sport. So they had proved myself over and over and over and over through my career and through the 10 years after my career. And I was terrified of them because I had watched what they did to people who disagreed with them. I had watched, and it was horrible. They destroyed their careers, they destroyed their reputations, and they made sure that they never had a place in the USA Gymnastics community again. And if you were in any way responsible for gymnasts that had to compete in that community, you were hurting your gymnast. So you never said anything to hurt that organization. So I was terrified. But then you kind of look at what you're dealing with, the lives of children, or people that only care about money and medals and lining their pockets and treating people like machines. Yeah, I'm going to go with the lives of children, you know, and then you pick up the phone and you make the call. It was a devastating, decision for me, but I made the call. And after the call, I found out I was the third person with a similar story that was completely separate, and they were able to publish the first story about Larry Nassar. And again, I thought there are three. Wow. And then we did a 60 minutes after I had signed up with a legal team that was absolutely incredible, and they had worked with mass sexual abuse cases with the Catholic Church, and they just treated me like a human. And honestly, that had not happened very much in my life. It's very sad, but it just had never been my experience. We did 60 minutes, and then people just started coming forward, and we had no idea. We just had no idea how huge this would be. We came into it thinking, okay, a few of us have been violated and sexually abused by this man, and nobody's going to believe us. USA Gymnastics is going to destroy us, but we just have to do this because it's right. And then it started snowballing. There was no ball at the beginning of this. We had to, something got created, and then something, got pushed, and then it started rolling. And that's, what pushed me was my students. And I was very, very lucky to have the support that I did from my team, from the lawyers and the media team, because they had already seen what had happened to so many victims and knew how to treat us,
Thank you, Jessica. Wow. Okay, so at this point, I'm supposed to stop for just a moment and ask you to pass down your questions to the right. I'm just very aware of the time. I'm not sure how many of these really we're going to be able to get to, but the point is that there's going to be an opportunity over there to put the questions out. And again, this is also about expressing support for some of our panelists. So with that, I'm going to transition us a little. Remember it's bad, it doesn't have to be this way, and everyone has a role to play. We're going to talk a little bit more now about, as the questions are being collected, about kind of what we can do differently. So you've heard the stories of these athletes, and I want to go back to this idea of it doesn't have to be this way, and you, all of you in this room, have a role in terms of changing the future of children and generations to come. So with that, I want to start with you again, Karen. Tell us a little bit more about this idea, and we've talked about this earlier today, how frustrating it can be when you're kind of, all of a sudden you come forward and then you're labeled as that survivor of abuse and put in this box. How could people react differently, and how can people who are here, learn from that experience about what to do better?
I suppose for me, what I'm finding is there is so many of us, thank God, have found our voices, and we are starting to speak up and stand up and speak up. But I am finding that all of a sudden there's been a box created, and in that box is survivors of child sexual abuse. That does not sit with me. I don't like it. Not only that, but I've been told that in Ireland, if somebody younger comes along and they talk about what happened to them, maybe they might engage with them, because at the moment in Ireland, nobody's engaging with me, because I've been told I'm a historical case. So not now only am I being put in a survivor box, but I'm now in a historical box. I am not historical. I am not dead. I've been dead my whole life up until the past year and a half. I am alive. I am well. I have found my voice. Right now, there's a little girl inside me. My 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old little girl inside me is very scared. And she's saying to me, why are you telling them? She's very frightened. She's living the moment that she lived as a little girl. That's what our little girls and boys and young people feel and are like when they're small. They're frightened to speak. So for me, we are, everybody in this room is a survivor. Life, you survive life. But we are much more than survivors. We are individuals, and I worry that the individuality gets lost in the box of survivors and historical cases. I am an individual, every one of us sitting here, we are individuals. We have gifts and we have strengths. I have fought my whole life to stand up here and find my voice. I've spent 10 years in a psychiatric hospital, in and out of it. I was 2 years as an inpatient in that hospital. And in that hospital, I had to be locked up and put in a lock-up ward for them to keep me alive because of the many suicide attempts that I had attempted, because I couldn't live with the deep pain. And in that hospital, I cried out to those doctors. And I said to them, if you cut off my 2 arms and my 2 legs without an anaesthetic, you will never know or feel what I'm feeling right now, because that would not hurt me as much as what's happening to me now. You cannot see it, but I can feel it, and it hurts so much. I have found my voice. I am free. I have stood up, and I've found peace in my life. I am not going to be put in a box anymore. I've been in that box for all of my life. All of us that stand up and speak now, we speak because we do not want anyone else to ever, ever experience or live or feel what we have lived in our lives. I am asking you as organisations, as governments, all of you, please respect us, listen to us, hear us, see us as individuals, see us with our gifts and our strengths that each one of us have. I am also asking, this is my life now. This is what's keeping me alive. I lost everything. I have no education. I lost everything. I lost 30 years of my life because all I wanted to do was be dead, but I was dead. My body was walking around, but I wasn't here. I am asking you this, and why I do this is I want to work in this. This is my area. I might not have got qualifications in school or education, but I have the highest degree, a master's in the education of life. I know what it is like. I know what it feels like to be abused as a child. I also know what it's like and what it feels like to survive and to stand up and be alive and put my head on my pillow at night and be able to sleep, because I couldn't do that. You will not read in a book, and there is no research in the whole wide world will ever, ever tell you or let you know or feel what it is like to be abused. I know, we know. I am asking you to let us in, to allow us in, to work with us, to give us jobs. We are not the enemies. There's no point me sitting here and giving out and moaning and getting angry, because it's too late for me. It's not going to change my life. But my life now can change the lives of young people and children in this world if you let us in and let us work and give us jobs in this area. You'd be surprised how many people won't engage and won't listen. I am asking, please let us help you, give us jobs. There are children and young people out there who need our help right now, today. There's 3 different age groups sitting on this up here right now. There's 20-year-olds speaking out. Are we going to wait another 10, 20 years and have more people coming up and speaking? Because if that happens, we haven't done enough now. We have got, this is real, it is happening across the world. And the one thing, you know, as I said, there's no point me giving out or being angry. It's, what happened to me is done. It can't be changed. Sport is fantastic. Sport is amazing. It changes lives for children. It gives them memories. It gives them friendships. It's lifelong with you if you have the beauty and are given the opportunities to have your life peacefully and free from abuse in sport. If we get this right with our young children and our young people, they are the future. They will enhance and change the world, and we can start doing that now. Every single child and young person is precious, and every single child and young person has a right to their childhood free from any form of abuse. Please let us in, allow us, give us jobs, let us work with you. Thank you.
Colin,
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Karen. So powerful. What an honor to be here with the three of you, seriously. Colin, I want to go to you and then we'll go to Jessica again. So tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, again, this idea of change in the future. What could football clubs in particular, since I know that that's a lot of where your experience is at, do when it comes to preventing and responding abuse? And what kinds of lessons would you share with these organizations?
Well, I suppose I want to share with you my experience of trying to get the issue of sexual abuse taken seriously in football. And I'm going to use my old club, who, for what it's worth, are doing really good work now, I think, when it comes to safeguarding. But I want to talk about the initial responses of the club. And then the initial responses, as I see them, of organisations when faced with this issue, that it may be the case that there is sexual abuse been taken place in a particular sport that they may be responsible for. So I'll talk a bit about my club post my disclosure. When I disclosed in November, December 2016, I was at Chelsea Football Club, by the way. It transpired that Chelsea Football Club had paid off a former player, a man called Gary Johnson, £50,000 with a non-disclosure agreement. In other words, they'd paid him £50,000 in order not to say anything about his abuse. Now, it was his decision to take the £50,000, so that's fine, and to sign the NDA. But I think I want to draw out some points from that about how organisations actually react when faced with these particular accusations or revelations that these things have happened at their club. So the first point I'm saying, I'm trying to make, and I think this speaks for all of us to some extent, is clubs, organisations, I'll talk about my club, try to cover up. This is a classic example of covering up, and I think we ought to be aware of these initial type reactions. So essentially, clubs, institutions, organisations put the brand image, the institutional concerns above what I consider, and I hope we do, the more substantive issue of child sexual abuse. They looked to protect themselves. They deny it. It's not happening here. That's what happened at Chelsea in the first instance, and we've seen this in other institutions. And they also they view this as transactional. My old club viewed this as a £50,000 transaction to keep this stuff quiet. That's a very businessy approach, and I can understand why businesses do that. But I think that's taking the moral low ground. I think that's morally wrong. I think there are moral issues here that are far more important than financial issues. In a sense, we've seen it through all of our stories. We're getting a form of institutional betrayal here, as I've got it written down here. There's a disincentive for organisations to admit that this goes on, I would argue, and it takes quite a lot to get them to actually admit it's the case. And I understand. A lot of football clubs are businesses. It's an important issue. So, first of all, it's to cover up. That's my first point. That's been part of my experience. Organisations try to cover up. The second one is denial, and this is particularly football, the idea of denial. So what we're seeing in football clubs in the UK at the moment is that clubs are tending to be doing things about safeguarding if it's been shown that there has been sexual abuse taking place at their club. They're tending to do something. They have to. But in the case of football and non-recent child sexual abuse, which I'm part of, what clubs are saying is that actually we've had no reports of it happening in our club. Therefore, clearly, it's not happening. It's not happening here. So, therefore, we don't need to do anything about it. And by the way, you're an old guy. This happened in the past. This was 40 years ago or 30 years ago. Things have changed. Things have moved on. They don't happen now. I'm getting that. Now, the problem with that is that I think that's... well, it's disingenuous, let's put it that way. We just have to look at other sports, as we see, to understand that this is stuff that happens. It's not an issue about the past or specific sport. It's something that happens in sport. And this is because, and we talked about this earlier, is about power differentials. It's about power. You know, the coach-athlete relationship is one based on a maldistribution of power. Coaches have the power, the athletes don't. Coaches have a tremendous amount of power. And I think we need to understand that. And so to deny it's not happening if we don't see this is a denial of the obvious, it seems to me. So I would see that the progress is when we start to look at safeguarding as something we don't do well and always act as an organisation as if we're not doing well and not doing well enough, and then we would get more robust safeguarding. And I think a real important point for us to think about and to work on here is that notion of shifting the power between the coach and the athlete. In other words, giving the athlete voice, pushing the power down, so the athlete is allowed, feels able, culturally, personally, or whatever, to say something. The thing for me that's going to live with me until the day I die, I'm a 62-year-old man, and it's still with me now. Why did I not say something? Why didn't I say anything? And I think we can do things. Actually, we don't know how to do this very well, and I think there's work to be done on this. But that's such a powerful transformation, if only we could affect those changes. I think that's important. Can I just talk about one more thing about power? I'm negotiating time. Okay, so, and I think this is very pertinent to hear. I mean, what I've learned is if you want to get change, you have to convince the people at the top. You really have to convince the people at the top. Whenever I've been able to affect change or feel that I'm getting people listening to me and things are happening is when I've got two examples. The chairman of the English Football Association, I've spoken to him and captured him, as it were. Stuff starts to happen. I think likewise the chairman of Chelsea Football Club, who I think is doing a terrific job at the moment, he now understands the legacy of child sex abuse and how this wrecks people's lives. And he is doing action. We are here to try to convince powerful people like you, people out here, to take action. And much as Mary talked about, walking the walk here. This is why we're here. This is what we're trying to do. As I said, I sometimes worry that I'm seeing too much talking and not enough action. So I've repeated that twice. So I obviously mean it. I think if I stop there, because I realise I'm taking up time. Yes.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. We're going with the flow here. We're going to make this work, and I don't think we're going to have a lot of time for questions, but I think it's so powerful to hear from your voices and your experience. So I want to turn to you, Jessica, and ask you to share with us. We've heard some very powerful recommendations. What would you suggest to this audience in particular about what people could do differently?
Well, honestly, I was so excited to be able to speak to this audience because I think that they can do more to curb sexual abuse than even they might realize. Sponsors and umbrella organizations must immediately respond to reports of sexual abuse by contacting law enforcement. That has to be the first thing that happens because so many people are turning the other way, pretending it's not happening, and you see the heads of these organizations and they've seen something in an email or they've heard around the water cooler. Does that come from the 90s? I don't even know. Whatever. But just, you know, these very powerful people have heard enough to have made a report and did nothing. And I think after contacting law enforcement, if predators are found guilty, those who looked the other way must be held accountable by job loss and criminal prosecution. That has never been done before. Those who control the money that supports these organizations must withdraw funding and demand organizational change immediately. Restructured organizations can then make sure every member, coach, official knows and follows the abuse policies that have been set up by outside professionals who know how to deal with child abuse, sexual abuse, and any kind of abuse that might cause problems for children as they grow and live and hopefully flourish into amazing adults who can affect change in this world.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you all three. Okay, so we have, Mary, I'm doing what you did so well earlier, which is kind of going with the flow here. We only have a few minutes left, so I think what I'll do is, instead of reading a few of the questions, I'm going to read a couple of the messages of support, because it is so hard. I know how hard it is to be out here and to share your story and to have kind of an audience looking back at you and not to have a chance to interact. So this is one message that says, you are all heroes. Thank you. The other one is, thank you very much for contributing today. What you are doing is incredibly brave and necessary. Your stories and your fight are truly inspiring. And so I think what I'll do is I'll ask you to, one of you, if you want, to answer the following question, and then we'll move on to close out to make sure we're on time. It says, when I get home, what should I do? What should I tell my colleagues in order to prevent abuse occurring in my sporting organization? So I think the question is really about, what can someone do once they leave here and go home within their organization? We've already heard some amazing suggestions, actually, to answer that question, but I don't know if someone wants to add something else.
I would just like to say, while all the conferences in the world, all the policies, all the procedures and everything that's put in place are fantastic and we need them, but please remember this does not stop abuse. This does not prevent it. They are there. Anyone that wants to hurt or abuse a child, they're going to go, they're going to do the training, they're going to go to the conferences, they're going to tick the boxes. But they're still going to go out and do what they do. Out there in the real world of children and young people, abuse is real and abuse is happening. They're not aware. So it's how we communicate this down. Back to the word implement. It's back, action speaks louder than words, and it's back to what Mary said earlier on this morning. We have to start action and walk. You do so much talking, but it's now time to do the walk, and it's time to get out there, and the people that are in charge or in power and have the key to the money and everything to say, yes, go and do this. Please, we need to go and do this. There are children and young people out there across the world that need our help right now. And we are all on the same page. Let's work together to do this.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists, because I'm going to have to wrap up, if there's some final words you want to say, and if not, I'll just wrap up. Final message you want to leave us with here today. We've said so much already. Do you want to say something, and then I'll wrap this up. All right, Colin.
I'm going to repeat myself because this is something I feel so strongly about. And Nancy has talked about this. We need to understand how to give children, young athletes, a voice, and we need to change the power dynamic. That is going to make so much difference. So much difference. That's it.
All right. Do you want to say something?
Just to echo what's already been said, I think, just to hammer it home, it has been an issue for me because while doing media or writing about my own experience, people are so fixated on the event, and I think only now people are even willing to listen to what happens after the event. This is not something that that leaves you. It's not like a broken leg, and I think that's why things like statutes of limitations, like at least in the United States, are what they are, and why we have not been able to pursue justice in the past, and why there is such a fight to pursue that justice now. But what happened to me once I came forward, I was unprepared for the emotional trauma. The PTSD and other textbook side effects would take over my life to the point of debilitation. And to be here in front of you today is because I've met amazing people who believe in human rights and who actually believed me and believed in me and just gave me a vision of life that would actually allow children to fall in love with sports the way I fell in love with the sport at the very beginning. And to take that on into life, I can't imagine what my life would have been like. And I'm happy with the life I have. I'm happy with the people I love and care about. But I just want people who ever are lucky enough to have that feeling to cherish it and keep it with them for the rest of their life, because they're the ones that are going to rule the world and make the world a better place. So this is not just something that happens once. This goes on for life. We should be treating it like anything else that is a lifelong issue, and it needs to be dealt with effectively and quickly, just like a lifelong issue should. So thank you. That's my last.
All right. So, all right. So to close, a couple of thoughts. I'm not going to repeat what our amazing panelists have said. They've said it better than anyone can say it. I do want to remind you that there is support available. We've heard from several of the messages, people starting to talk about their own experiences, and so I want to remind people that on that sheet of paper there are clinicians available to talk if you would like that. Also on the Sporting Chance website, there is a list of organizations by country that offer support on these issues if you want to go on and look at them and find out more. There's also going to be a table at lunch with some of us who have expertise in this area. I know Kat and I will be there, Nancy, a few others that want to join. So if you want to come and have a conversation, please do. And I think there's some very concrete recommendations for all of you that came from the panel that I hope you will take to heart. And so with that, I think the last thing I'll say is I love quotes. I'm going to close with a last quote, and that is the American activist, civil rights activist Angela Davis once said, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept." The sexual abuse of children in sport is unacceptable. And we have a moral and ethical responsibility, all of us here today in this room, to do something about it. And if we work together, we can make a difference for generations to come. Thank you very much.